Do you know what it feels like to catch someone stealing from you right in front of your face, and they actually believe it's their right? I lived through that. My neighbor, the HOA president, casually plugged her Tesla into my outdoor outlet every single night. My electricity bill shot up to nearly $800 while she bragged about her green lifestyle to the whole neighborhood. If you've ever dealt with someone who thinks they're entitled to cross your boundaries, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. The envelope from Arizona Public Service sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. I wasn't avoiding it. I just didn't think there was anything to worry about. I had an 8-kilowatt solar system on my roof, paid for in cash, $18,000, installed 14 months ago. My electricity bills had been running between $80 and $120 a month ever since. Predictable, comfortable, the whole point of going solar in Phoenix. Then I opened the June statement. $847.16. I read the number 3 times. I held the paper up to the light like there might be some printing error, some smudge that had turned an 8 into an 80. There wasn't. The number was real. The number was impossible. And the number was mine. My first thought was equipment failure. Maybe the inverter had died. Maybe the panels had somehow disconnected from the grid. I pulled up the monitoring app on my phone, the one that tracks solar production in real time, and scrolled through the data. June had been a good month. Full sun, minimal cloud cover, panels operating at 96% efficiency. According to my system, I should have generated more than enough power to cover my usage and then some. But according to APS, I had consumed nearly 3,000 kilowatt hours in 30 days. That was triple my normal usage. That was running 3 air conditioners at full blast around the clock. That was physically impossible for a single guy living alone in a 1,600 square foot house. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I spent the rest of that evening going through my house like a detective. Checked every outlet. Checked the HVAC system. Checked the water heater, the refrigerator, and the garage door opener. Everything was normal. Everything was functioning exactly as it should. The phantom load that had eaten $700 of my money wasn't inside my house. It was 11:47 when I finally thought to check outside. The Arizona night was warm and dry, the kind of heat that lingers in the concrete long after the sun goes down. I walked around the side of my house with a flashlight, following the exterior wall toward the backyard. That's when I saw it, a faint green glow pulsing near my back fence, a light that shouldn't have been there, a light I had never seen before. The 240-volt outlet near my pool equipment panel was occupied. A thick black charging cable snaked out of it, running across my patio, under my fence, and into the yard next door. The cable terminated at a white Tesla Model Y parked in my neighbor's driveway. The charging indicator on the port blinked green in a slow, steady rhythm. The faint hum of electrical current filled the silence. I stood there for 30 seconds, not because I was shocked, because I was calculating. The vanity plate on the Tesla read GRN Queen. I knew that plate. Everyone in Sycamore Ridge knew that plate. It belonged to Melissa Ramirez, 52 years old, 10-year president of our homeowners association. The woman who had fined the Hendersons at number 12 for leaving their trash cans out 6 hours past collection time. The woman who had sent 3 certified letters to the Okafor family at number 7 because their bougainvillea had grown 6 inches past the property line. The woman who had appointed herself guardian of neighborhood standards and enforcer of community rules. She was charging her $70,000 electric vehicle with my electricity. She was doing it at midnight when she thought no one would notice. And based on my bill, she had been doing it for months. The old version of me, the version from 5 years ago, would have marched next door and pounded on her door, would have shouted, would have demanded an explanation, would have given her exactly what she needed, an angry neighbor making a scene, someone she could paint as unstable, someone whose complaints could be dismissed as a personal vendetta. I didn't do any of that. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I took 7 photographs from different angles, making sure to capture the cable running from my outlet to her car. I recorded a 30-second video, panning slowly from the outlet to the fence, to the Tesla, to the license plate. I checked the timestamp. June 19th, 11:53 p.m. I emailed the files to myself with a subject line that read, Evidence, Utility Theft, Melissa Ramirez, Date 1. Then I went back inside, sat down at my laptop, and started a folder. I didn't unplug the cable. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a text message. Melissa Ramirez had been running this neighborhood for a decade. She had outlasted complaints, outlasted conflicts, outlasted families who had simply gotten tired of fighting and moved away. She was good at making problems disappear, and she was very good at making the people who raised those problems look like the real troublemakers. But I had something the others didn't have. I had 12 years of experience working with data. I had the patience to build a case. And I had finally found something worth being patient about. Looking back, that moment in the backyard was when everything changed. Not because I discovered the theft, though that was important, but because I made a choice. I chose documentation over confrontation. I chose process over passion. I chose to fight the way that would actually win, not the way that would feel satisfying for 5 minutes and cost me everything afterward. Melissa Ramirez didn't know it yet, but she had just made the worst mistake of her decade-long reign. She had stolen from someone who knew how to build a case, and I was just getting started. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that green charging light pulsing in the darkness, steady and shameless. The image burned behind my eyelids like a brand. By 6 in the morning, I gave up on rest and made coffee. By 7, I was deep into my utility account history, pulling up every statement from the past year. The pattern revealed itself like a photograph developing in a darkroom. January through March told a normal story. $89, $94, $107, exactly what $18,000 of solar panels should deliver in the Arizona sun. Then April hit, $320. May climbed higher to $540. June peaked at $847.16. The graph on my screen looked like a ski slope in reverse. I built a spreadsheet comparing each month's consumption against the previous year. The math was damning. My excess usage over 3 months totaled approximately 2,800 kilowatt hours, enough to fully charge a Tesla Model Y between 35 and 40 times. At Arizona's peak rates, the estimated theft totaled between $1,400 and $1,600. I saved the file as Ramirez Theft Analysis V1 and moved it into my evidence folder. Then I searched 3 words: utility theft, Arizona. What I found made me sit back. Under Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-1816, theft of utility services over $1,000 constitutes a Class 6 felony, up to 2 years in state prison. Melissa Ramirez hadn't just stolen my electricity, she had potentially committed a felony. I bookmarked the statute page and saved a PDF copy. Knowledge was ammunition. Around noon, I walked outside to check my mail. The June heat hit me like a wall. Dry, relentless, over 110 degrees. Dave from number 15 was at the mailbox cluster, sorting through envelopes. He was a general contractor in his late 40s. Sun-weathered hands, direct manner, the kind of guy who recognized trouble when he saw it. He'd lived in Sycamore Ridge for almost 12 years. "You look like hell," Dave said. "Rough night?" I considered how much to share. Then I remembered that Melissa's power came from isolation, from making each target feel like they were alone. So I told him everything. The bill, the cable, the Tesla is charging at midnight. Dave's expression darkened. When I finished, he glanced toward Melissa's house, then lowered his voice. "You know about the Jenkins family? Used to live at number 19? I shook my head. They had solar panels too. About 18 months ago, their bills started going crazy. Couldn't figure out why. Dave paused. Melissa told them it was probably a faulty inverter. They spent $800 on technicians who found absolutely nothing wrong. I felt a cold weight settle into my stomach. What happened to them? They got tired. Every time they raised concerns, something else went wrong. HOA violation notices for minor stuff. Complaints about their lawn, their paint color, and their guest parking. Death by 1,000 cuts. Dave shrugged, but his eyes were serious. They sold last October. Told everyone it was for work relocation. Anyone paying attention knew the real reason. Melissa drove them out. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was a pattern. Melissa had done this before, and she had a playbook for neutralizing anyone who pushed back. Discredit, exhaust, isolate, repeat until the target surrendered or fled. Why hasn't anyone reported her? I asked. Report her to whom? She's the HOA president. She controls what gets discussed, what gets enforced. Without hard evidence, any accusation sounds like a personal grudge. Dave laughed without humor. That's how she survived 10 years. He was right. But I had timestamps, I had video footage, I had billing records showing an impossible spike that coincided exactly with her Tesla purchase in March. And I was about to have much more. That afternoon, I placed 2 orders online. A smart energy monitor to track consumption at my outdoor outlet, $149. A weatherproof security camera with infrared night vision and cloud backup, $199. Both would arrive within 2 days. Around 6 that evening, I was bringing in packages when I spotted Melissa walking her small white dog past my driveway. She wore yoga pants and designer sunglasses, and she smiled warmly, like we were the best of neighbors. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" she called out. "I heard you were outside pretty late last night, checking on your pool equipment." The question was a test. She wanted to see if I would confront her, give her something she could use. I smiled back, matching her energy exactly. "Just routine maintenance. You know how these outdoor outlets can be." "Of course. Well, if you ever need help navigating any HOA resources, don't hesitate to ask. That's what community leadership is for." I watched her continue down the sidewalk, not a care in the world. She knew that I knew, and she was confident it didn't matter, that I would react like everyone else, with frustration and eventual surrender. I stood there in my driveway, watching her disappear around the corner with her little white dog. 10 years. 10 years she had been doing this, stealing, manipulating, driving families out of their homes. And she walked around this neighborhood like she owned it, like the rules she enforced on everyone else were just decorations that didn't apply to her. But here's the thing about people who get away with something for too long. They stop being careful. They start believing they're untouchable. And that belief, that's exactly what makes them fall. Melissa Ramirez had power in Sycamore Ridge, but power without accountability is borrowed time, and I was about to call in the debt. The packages arrived 2 days later, just as promised. I spent that Saturday morning installing the smart energy monitor on my 240-volt outlet and mounting the security camera under the eave of my back porch. The camera had a wide-angle lens with infrared night vision, motion-activated recording, and automatic cloud backup. The monitor connected to my phone via an app that would alert me anytime the outlet drew more than 1 kilowatt of power. By noon, both systems were operational and invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. Then I waited. The first alert came at 11:47 that night. My phone buzzed on my nightstand, pulling me out of a light sleep. I opened the app and watched the power draw spike from 0 to 7.2 kilowatts, the exact signature of a Tesla charging at maximum speed. I switched to the camera feed and watched in real time as Melissa Ramirez walked across her backyard in a bathrobe, climbed through a gap in the fence I hadn't noticed before, and plugged her charging cable into my outlet. The whole process took less than 90 seconds. She didn't look around. She didn't hesitate. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. I saved the footage. Timestamp, June 22nd, 11:47 p.m. At 6:32 the next morning, another alert. I watched as Melissa returned, unplugged the cable, and disappeared back through the fence, all before I would normally wake up on a Sunday. She had calculated my schedule. She knew when I slept and when I rose. She had turned theft into routine. I spent that Sunday composing a letter. A cease isn't a legal document in the formal sense. It doesn't require a lawyer, and it doesn't carry the force of law. But it serves a critical purpose. It creates a paper trail. It establishes, in writing, that the offending party has been notified of their behavior and asked to stop. If they continue after receiving such a letter, any future legal action can point to that document as proof of willful violation. The difference between "I didn't know" and "I was warned and did it anyway" is the difference between a mistake and a crime. I kept the language simple and factual. I described the behavior, unauthorized use of the 240-volt electrical outlet at my property address. I stated the demand, immediate cessation of all such use. I outlined the consequences. If the behavior continued, I would file a formal complaint with Arizona Public Service, report the theft to local law enforcement, and pursue civil remedies for damages. I attached 2 pieces of evidence, a screenshot from the smart meter showing the power spike, and a still image from the camera showing Melissa plugging in her cable. I printed 2 copies, signed both, and dated them June 23rd. One copy went into my evidence folder. The other went to the post office, where I sent it via certified mail with a return receipt requested. That little green card would come back to me with Melissa's signature, proving she had received the letter. Then I walked over to her house and slipped a third copy, unsigned, marked courtesy copy, into her mailbox. If you've ever dealt with someone who thinks your property is their property, drop a like and let me know I'm not alone in this. The confrontation came faster than I expected. 4 hours after I dropped off the courtesy copy, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Melissa standing on my porch, the letter crumpled in her fist. Her face was flushed. Her voice was shaking, not with fear, but with outrage. "What the hell is this?" She thrust the letter toward me. "Are you threatening me?" I kept my voice level. "I'm notifying you. That outlet is my property. The electricity running through it is paid for by me. You've been using both without permission. You have solar panels." Her voice rose higher. "That's free energy from the sun. It belongs to everyone. It's a community resource. The solar system cost me $18,000. The electricity it generates is credited to my account by APS. When you charge your car from my outlet, APS charges me for that power." I paused. There's nothing free about it, and there's nothing communal about it. I am the president of this HOA. Melissa stepped closer, her finger jabbing the air between us. "I have dedicated 10 years to making this neighborhood what it is. And you think you can come here and accuse me of stealing? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm showing you documentation of what happened and asking you to stop." I nodded toward the letter in her hand. "That's all. You'll regret this." Her voice dropped to something cold and hard. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will make your life in this neighborhood a living hell." She turned and stormed off my porch, the letter still clutched in her fist like a weapon she intended to use against me. I watched her go. She crossed the street without looking, yanked open her front door, and disappeared inside. The door slammed hard enough that I heard it from 50 feet away, and I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a calm, clinical clarity. She had just made a critical mistake. In her rage, she hadn't denied the theft. She hadn't claimed the footage was fake or that the meter was wrong. She had argued that she was entitled to my electricity because solar power was free and communal. She had admitted the behavior while defending her right to continue it, and she had done all of this on my front porch, in broad daylight, within range of my doorbell camera. I checked the app. The entire conversation had been recorded in crisp, clear audio and video. I saved the file, added it to my folder, and updated my spreadsheet with a new entry. June 23rd, subject received cease and desist letter. Subject confirmed behavior. Subject issued a verbal threat. Full recording saved. The line had been drawn. The warning had been delivered. If Melissa Ramirez crossed that line again, she wouldn't be able to claim ignorance. She wouldn't be able to say she didn't understand. Every action she took from this point forward would be willful, documented, and admissible. The ball was in her court now, and I already knew what she was going to do with it. 3 days passed without an alert. No midnight charging sessions, no green light pulsing in the darkness, no power spikes on my smart meter. For 72 hours, my outdoor outlet sat dormant, drawing nothing but the baseline current needed to keep the monitoring equipment running. Part of me wondered if the cease and desist had actually worked. Maybe Melissa had realized the risk wasn't worth the reward. Maybe the threat of legal consequences had penetrated that armor of entitlement she wore like a second skin. Maybe she had found another victim, or, better yet, finally decided to charge her Tesla using her own electricity like a normal human being. I should have known better. The alert came at 2:17 in the morning on June 27th. My phone buzzed on my nightstand, and I was awake before my eyes fully opened. I grabbed the device and pulled up the camera feed, my heart already beating faster than it should have been. The footage showed Melissa crossing through the gap in the fence, but something was different this time. She wasn't wearing a bathrobe. She was dressed entirely in black. Dark pants, dark long-sleeve shirt, dark baseball cap pulled low over her face. She moved quickly, almost furtively, staying close to the fence line where shadows were deepest. She plugged in the charging cable, looked around twice, then retreated through the gap and disappeared into her yard. She thought she was being clever. She thought changing her schedule and wearing dark clothes would somehow make her invisible. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that my camera had infrared night vision. To the lens, 2:17 in the morning looked the same as 2:17 in the afternoon, Every detail was captured in crisp, clear footage. Her face, her clothes, the cable in her hands, the timestamp in the corner of the frame. I saved the video, took screenshots of the smart meter showing the power draw spike, updated my evidence log. June 27th, 2:17 a.m. Subject resumed unauthorized use of electrical outlet 4 days after receiving cease and desist letter. The subject attempted to conceal their identity with dark clothing. Full footage saved. She had been warned. She had acknowledged the warning, and she had chosen to continue anyway. In legal terms, this was no longer simple theft. This was a willful violation after notice, a factor that could significantly increase both civil damages and criminal penalties. I went back to sleep. There was nothing else to do until morning. The counterattack came at 9:43 a.m., delivered via email. The subject line read, Official HOA Notice, Violation of CCNR Section 7.3. The body of the email, sent from Melissa's official HOA president account, informed me that I had 7 days to remove the surveillance device mounted on my back porch or face fines of $100 per day. The stated violation was Section 7.3 of our community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which allegedly prohibited security cameras that monitor neighboring properties or common areas. I read the email 3 times, then I pulled up the full CCNR document, all 83 pages, and navigated to Section 7.3. The actual text was nothing like what Melissa had described. Section 7.3 addressed surveillance devices directed at common areas, meaning cameras pointed at shared spaces like the pool, the clubhouse, or the main entrance. It said nothing about cameras mounted on private property and pointed at private property. My camera was attached to my house, aimed at my backyard, recording my outlet. The fact that it happened to capture Melissa committing theft on my property wasn't a violation. It was evidence. She was bluffing. She was using her position as HOA president to manufacture a fake violation, hoping I would panic and remove my surveillance before she could be caught again. It was the same playbook she had used against the Jenkins family, the same strategy of harassment and intimidation that had driven them out of the neighborhood. But I wasn't the Jenkins family. That afternoon, I called Arizona Public Service and requested a formal investigation. I explained that I had documentation of unauthorized electricity usage at my property and suspected a neighbor of theft. The representative took my information and said a report would be generated within 5 to 7 business days. I asked for everything in writing. She agreed. Around 5 that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Dave. Got the HOA email about your camera? That's complete BS. Section 7.3 doesn't say what she claims. Want me to back you up at the next board meeting? I typed back, appreciate it, I'm building a file. We'll let you know when I need witnesses. His response came quickly. She's scared. That's why she's attacking. Don't let up. I sat on my back porch as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The heat was finally breaking, dropping from unbearable to merely uncomfortable. I could see the gap in my fence from where I sat, the gap Melissa had been using for months, maybe years, to access my property without permission. I thought about Dave's words. She's scared. That's why she's attacking. He was right. The cease and desist had rattled her. For the first time in a decade, someone wasn't backing down. Someone was documenting. Someone was building a case. And instead of stopping, instead of cutting her losses and hoping the whole thing would blow over, she had doubled down, changed her schedule, worn dark clothes, sent a fake violation notice. Every action she took dug the hole deeper.
That's the thing about people who've gotten away with something for too long. They don't know how to stop. They've never had to learn. So when someone finally pushes back, they don't retreat. They escalate. And every escalation creates more evidence, more documentation, more rope to hang themselves with.
Melissa Ramirez thought she was fighting me. She didn't realize she was fighting a paper trail. And paper trails don't get tired. Paper trails don't get intimidated. Paper trails just keep growing until there's nowhere left to hide. The report from Arizona Public Service arrived on July 1st. A manila envelope in my mailbox, official letterhead, everything documented in black and white. I opened it standing in my kitchen, my coffee growing cold on the counter beside me. The findings confirmed what I already knew, but seeing it from a third party transformed suspicion into fact. Total excess usage at my 240-volt outlet over 4 months, approximately 2,800 kilowatt hours. Estimated value, $1,412. The report noted that such patterns were consistent with unauthorized third-party usage, and recommended I secure the outlet and consider filing a report with local law enforcement. I added the document to my evidence folder. Between the timestamps, the footage, the utility records, and Melissa's own certified signature on my cease and desist receipt, I didn't just have a case anymore. I had a locked door with no key on her side. That weekend, I flew to San Diego for a 2-day conference. Work obligation couldn't be avoided. I set my security system to record continuously and checked the feeds remotely whenever I had a free moment. Friday night, nothing. Saturday morning, nothing. I started to relax. Maybe Melissa had finally gotten the message. I landed back in Phoenix on Sunday evening and pulled into my driveway just after 7. The Arizona sunset was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and for a moment, everything felt normal, peaceful. Then I walked around to my backyard. The 240-volt outlet looked different, wrong. I stepped closer and saw why. The standard outlet cover had been replaced with a heavy-duty lockbox, the kind that requires a special key to open. A lockbox I had never purchased, a lockbox I had never installed. I pulled up the camera footage on my phone and scrubbed backward through the timeline. Saturday afternoon, 3:27 p.m. There she was. Melissa Ramirez crossed through the gap in the fence, followed by a man in work clothes carrying a toolbox. They walked directly to my outlet. The man spent 12 minutes removing the existing cover and installing the lockbox. Melissa stood watch the entire time, arms crossed, scanning the yard like a sentry. When he finished, she handed him what looked like cash. They both left through the fence. I stood there, staring at the lockbox, feeling something shift inside my chest. She had come onto my property while I was gone. She had hired someone to modify my equipment. She had done it in broad daylight, on camera, thinking no one would ever know. I photographed the lockbox from every angle, saved the footage to 3 separate cloud accounts, called a locksmith who arrived within the hour, removed the unauthorized lockbox, and installed a new secure cover with a combination only I knew. Total cost, $183. I kept the receipt. Can you guess what Melissa did next? Drop a comment with your prediction, then keep listening to see how I changed the voltage on this whole situation. The confrontation came the following morning. I was checking my mail when I heard rapid footsteps behind me. I turned to find Melissa striding toward me across the street, her face flushed red, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was breathing hard, almost trembling. "You called the power company?" Her voice cracked. "You filed a complaint? What the hell do you think you're doing?" I kept my posture relaxed, my voice even. "I'm protecting my property, same as any homeowner would." "You're destroying this community." She stepped closer, close enough so I could see the veins standing out in her neck. "I've spent 10 years building this neighborhood. 10 years. And you think you can just waltz in here and accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing you of anything." I met her eyes. "I'm documenting what's happening. The footage speaks for itself." "What footage? What are you—" She stopped. The color drained from her face as the realization hit her. The camera she had tried to get me to remove with her fake violation notice. It had been recording the entire time. "I'm the person who paid $1,600 for your Tesla's electricity," I said quietly. "I'm the person who has video of you on my property at 2 a.m. I'm the person who watched you hire someone to tamper with my outlet while I was out of town." I paused. "And I'm the person who's going to present all of this at the HOA meeting in 2 weeks. Melissa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. For the first time since I'd moved to Sycamore Ridge, she had nothing to say. No threats, no justifications, no entitlement dressed up as community spirit. Just silence. I turned and walked back to my house without another word. She stood there on the sidewalk for a long time. I know because I watched her through my window. She just stood there, frozen, staring at my front door like the ground had opened up beneath her feet, and she was still falling. I thought about feeling sorry for her. The thought lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then I remembered the Jenkins family, the $800 they wasted on inspections, the violations that appeared out of nowhere, the way they finally gave up and sold their home just to escape. Melissa had done that. Melissa had driven them out with a smile on her face, confident that no one would ever make her answer for it. She had been wrong. The HOA annual meeting was 14 days away. 40 households would be in attendance. There would be an open forum segment where any resident could raise concerns. I had already checked the bylaws. Any member in good standing had the right to address the assembly for up to 15 minutes. 15 minutes was more than enough. I spent that evening organizing my presentation. Slides, timelines, screenshots, video clips cued to the exact moments that mattered. I wasn't going to accuse Melissa of anything. I was going to show the community what she had done and let them draw their own conclusions. The evidence would speak, and for once, Melissa Ramirez wouldn't be able to speak over it. The community center at Sycamore Ridge held about 60 people when the folding chairs were set up in rows. On the evening of July 15th, 43 residents filled those seats, the largest turnout for an HOA annual meeting in 5 years. Word had spread, not from me. I hadn't told anyone except Dave what I planned to do. But neighborhoods talk, rumors travel, and somehow everyone seemed to know that tonight was going to be different. Melissa sat at the front table with the other board members, 3 people who had rubber-stamped her decisions for years. She wore a blazer and pearls, her hair freshly styled, her smile fixed in place like armor. She looked confident. She looked prepared. She had no idea what was coming. The meeting followed its usual agenda. Budget reports, maintenance updates, a discussion about repainting the pool house. Melissa conducted each item with practiced efficiency, her voice smooth and authoritative. This was her kingdom. These were her subjects. For 10 years, this room had belonged to her. At 8:32, she announced the open forum segment. Any resident in good standing may address the board for up to 15 minutes. Do we have any? I raised my hand. Melissa's smile flickered, just for a moment. Then it returned, harder than before. Yes, the gentleman from number 23. Please state your name for the record. I walked to the front of the room, laptop under my arm. I had requested permission to use the projector earlier that day, citing a property matter I wanted to discuss. The AV equipment was already connected. I plugged in my computer and waited for the screen to flicker to life. My name is on record, I said. I'm here to present documentation of unauthorized use of my personal property by a member of this community. I'll be showing evidence, including utility records, security footage, and official correspondence. Everything I'm about to present has timestamps and third-party verification. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for a presentation. The electric quiet of people who sense something is about to break. I clicked to the first slide. My electricity bills from January through June, displayed as a simple bar graph. This is my utility history for the first half of this year. January through March, normal usage, consistent with my solar panel output. April through June, a 300% increase that cost me over $700 additional. Slide 2. A still image from my security camera. Melissa crossing through my fence at 11:47 p.m., charging cable in hand. A murmur rippled through the audience. This is footage from June 22nd. The individual pictured is accessing my property without permission and connecting an electric vehicle to my 240-volt outlet. Slide 3. The same scene from a different night. Melissa in dark clothing at 2:17 a.m. June 27th, 4 days after I sent a formal cease and desist letter requesting that this behavior stop. Slide 4. The APS report, key findings highlighted. This is an official report from Arizona Public Service confirming 2,800 kilowatt hours of anomalous consumption at my address. Estimated value of the stolen electricity, $1,412. Slide 5. Melissa and the man with the toolbox, frozen mid-frame on my patio. July 3rd. While I was out of state, this individual entered my property and hired someone to install an unauthorized lockbox on my electrical outlet. This footage shows the entire 12-minute process. The murmur became a rumble. People were turning to look at Melissa. She sat rigid at the front table, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table like she was trying to hold herself in place. That's enough. Her voice cut through the noise, sharp and brittle. This is slander. This is a personal attack. I won't allow... Point of order. Dave stood up from his seat in the third row. Under Section 4.2 of the HOA bylaws, any member addressing the open forum has the right to complete their presentation without interruption from board members. You can respond afterward. Melissa's mouth opened and closed. She looked at the other board members. None of them met her eyes. I continued. I'm not here to make accusations. I'm here to present facts. The utility company has confirmed the theft. The security footage shows who committed it. The certified mail receipt proves she was warned and continued anyway. I paused. Under Arizona law, theft of utilities over $1,000 is a Class 6 felony. I haven't filed a police report yet. I wanted to give this community the chance to address the matter first. The room exploded, not with shouting, with whispers. Dozens of conversations happening at once, neighbors leaning toward each other, pointing at the screen, shaking their heads. Then a woman stood up, Mrs. Patterson from number 22. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were clear. Last year, my electricity bill went up by almost $200 for 3 months straight. I thought my air conditioning was broken. I spent $400 on a technician who said nothing was wrong. She looked directly at Melissa. Was that you too? Melissa stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. This is ridiculous. Solar energy it's natural. It comes from the sun. It's meant to be shared for the good of the community. I was trying to reduce our collective carbon footprint, and this is the thanks I get? The room went silent, completely silent. 43 people staring at a woman who had just admitted to theft while claiming it was environmentalism. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Melissa had just done my job for me. Dave spoke again, his voice calm and steady. I move that we vote on 2 items. First, removal of Melissa Ramirez from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. Second, a formal demand that she reimburse all residents who can demonstrate unusual utility charges during her tenure. I second the motion, said Mr. Holloway from number 8. The vote was 34-3, with 6 abstentions. Melissa was removed from her position before the clock struck 9. The formal reimbursement demand passed by an even wider margin. I watched her gather her things from the front table. Her hands were shaking. Her pearls caught the fluorescent light as she fumbled with her purse. No one spoke to her. No one offered help. 10 years of accumulated power, and in 15 minutes it had evaporated like water on hot asphalt. She walked past me on her way to the door. For a moment, our eyes met. I expected anger. I expected hatred. What I saw was something else, something hollow and confused, like a person waking up in a room they don't recognize.
I felt the weight of what had just happened settle into my chest. Not triumph, not satisfied, something quieter, something that felt like the end of a long exhale. For months I had been holding my breath, building my case, waiting for this moment. Now it was over. The evidence had spoken, the community had listened, and Melissa Ramirez had finally run out of people to blame.
She pushed through the door and disappeared into the parking lot. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Procedural matters, interim leadership appointments, motions to review past violations. I barely heard any of it. When I finally walked out into the warm Arizona night, Dave was waiting by my car. Hell of a presentation, he said. I nodded. Thanks for the backup. That thing she said about solar energy being communal? Dave shook his head, almost laughing. She actually believed it. After everything, she actually thought she was the good guy. I looked up at the stars, faint, washed out by city light, but still there. That's the thing about people like her. They're never the villain in their own story, right up until the moment everyone else tells them different. 2 weeks after the HOA meeting, I received a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. The return address was a downtown Phoenix office, and the envelope had that thick, expensive feel that lawyers use when they want you to know they're serious. I opened it expecting a threat. What I found was a settlement offer. Melissa Ramirez, through her attorney, was offering to reimburse me $1,800, covering the stolen electricity, the locksmith fees, and a small amount for inconvenience, in exchange for my agreement not to pursue civil litigation. The letter emphasized that this was not an admission of guilt. It emphasized that Ms. Ramirez maintained her position that the electricity usage was a misunderstanding. It emphasized a lot of things that didn't matter. What mattered was the check that arrived 3 days after I signed the agreement. I deposited it without ceremony. $1,800, almost exactly what I'd calculated she owed me, plus a little extra for the trouble. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. But there was something satisfying about seeing those numbers in my account. Tangible. Documented, real. The legal consequences didn't stop there. I learned through Dave, who had become my primary source of neighborhood intelligence, that the Arizona Attorney General's office had opened a preliminary investigation based on the evidence I'd submitted after the HOA meeting. Melissa hadn't been arrested. She probably wouldn't be unless other victims came forward with similar claims, but she'd been forced to hire a criminal defense attorney just in case. Estimated cost? Somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. The free electricity she'd stolen was turning out to be very expensive. Mrs. Patterson from number 22 filed her own complaint with APS the week after the meeting. So did the Hendersons from number 12, who had noticed their bills spike mysteriously 2 years ago, but never connected the dots until they heard my presentation. The dominoes were falling one by one, and each one revealed another corner of Melissa's decade-long operation. If you've ever seen justice happen the right way, no violence, no revenge, just truth and consequences, hit subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. The social consequences were harder to measure, but impossible to miss. Melissa's white Tesla, the one with the GRN Queen vanity plate, no longer sat proudly in her driveway. It had migrated to her garage, door closed, out of sight. The little sign that had read HOA President beside her front door was gone, leaving behind a faint rectangular outline where the sun hadn't faded the paint. On the neighborhood group chat, her name stopped appearing entirely. No comments on community updates. No reminders about trash day. No passive-aggressive observations about lawn maintenance. She had become a ghost in the community she once ruled. I saw her exactly once during those 2 weeks. I was walking back from the mailbox when she pulled into her driveway. Our eyes met for half a second through her windshield. She looked away first, hit the garage door opener, and disappeared inside before her car had fully stopped. No wave, no acknowledgement, just retreat. I felt nothing. Not satisfied, not pity. Just the neutral recognition that this was how it was going to be from now on. We would live 30 feet apart and pretend the other didn't exist. In the grand scheme of neighbor relationships, I'd had worse. The HOA held a special election at the end of July to choose new leadership. The winner was Tom Rodriguez from number 31, a retired accountant in his 60s who had lived in Sycamore Ridge for 8 years. Tom was quiet, methodical, and deeply skeptical of concentrated power. He was also, as Dave pointed out with considerable amusement, the same person Melissa had fined $200 3 years ago for leaving his trash cans at the curb 4 hours past the designated pickup window. Tom's first act as president was to propose a bylaws amendment requiring that any violation notice be approved by at least 3 board members before being issued. No more unilateral enforcement. No more one person deciding who had broken the rules and who hadn't. The amendment passed unanimously. His second act was to commission an independent audit of HOA finances going back 5 years. The results wouldn't come for another 2 months, but the message was clear. The era of unchecked authority in Sycamore Ridge was over. I ran into Dave at the mailboxes a few days after Tom took office. He was grinning like a man who had just won a bet he'd been waiting years to collect. "You hear about the audit?" he asked. I nodded. "Think they'll find anything?" "Who knows? But that's not the point." Dave leaned against the mailbox cluster, arms crossed. "The point is that someone's looking. For the first time in 10 years, someone's actually looking. That changes everything." He was right. It wasn't about what the audit might uncover. It was about the fact that transparency had become the default instead of the exception. Melissa had operated in shadows for a decade, confident that no one would shine a light into the corners she controlled. Now every corner was illuminated. Every decision would be documented. Every action would be reviewed. That was the real victory. Not the $1,800, not Melissa's public humiliation, not even the criminal investigation that might or might not result in charges. The real victory was structural. The community had looked at how power had been abused and decided to build safeguards against it happening again.
I thought about that as I walked home. About how one person's entitlement, left unchecked, had poisoned a neighborhood for years. About how many families had suffered in silence, convinced they were alone, convinced that resistance was futile. The Jenkins family had given up and moved away. Mrs. Patterson had blamed her air conditioning. The Hendersons had shrugged and paid the extra bills. Everyone had assumed they were the only ones.
They weren't. They had never been. The isolation was the strategy. And breaking that isolation, showing people they weren't crazy, they weren't alone, they weren't wrong, had been enough to bring the whole system down. Justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's not a courtroom verdict or a pair of handcuffs. Sometimes it's a check for $1,800. Sometimes it's a bylaws amendment. Sometimes it's just the quiet knowledge that the person who wronged you has to live with the consequences, visible and permanent, for everyone to see. Melissa Ramirez still lived at the end of my street, but she didn't run anything anymore, and she never would again. 3 months later, autumn arrived in Arizona. The temperatures dropped from unbearable to merely warm. The sky turned that particular shade of blue that only desert states seem to produce. Deep, endless, clean. I sat on my back patio with a cup of coffee, watching the morning light spread across my yard, and realized I hadn't thought about Melissa Ramirez in almost 2 weeks. My electricity bill for September had arrived the day before. $93.42. Normal. Expected. Exactly what $18,000 of solar panels should deliver when no one is stealing the output. I had pinned the statement to my refrigerator like a trophy, not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. Closure, resolution, the end of something that had consumed 6 months of my life. People have asked me about the title of this story, Changing the Voltage. What does that mean? Did I do something to the outlet? Did I rig it to fry Melissa's charging cable? Did I set some kind of electrical trap? The answer is no. I never touched the voltage. I never sabotaged anything. I never did a single thing that could be called revenge in the traditional sense. Changing the voltage was a metaphor. It meant changing the intensity of my response. When I first discovered what Melissa was doing, my instinct was to confront her, to yell, to demand, to react with the same emotional voltage that the situation seemed to deserve. That's what she expected. That's what she had prepared for. 10 years of running this neighborhood had taught her exactly how to handle angry confrontations. Dismiss, deflect, discredit, exhaust. So, I changed the voltage. Instead of high-intensity emotion, I switched to low-intensity documentation. Instead of shouting matches, I built spreadsheets. Instead of accusations, I collected timestamps. I took a situation that was designed to be resolved through social tour. Who could intimidate whom? Who had more allies? Who could outlast the other's patience? And I converted it into a situation that could only be resolved through evidence. That was the voltage change, from heat to light, from reaction to record, from playing her game to playing a completely different one. If this story helped you think differently about protecting your own boundaries, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've got your own story about standing up to someone who thought they were untouchable, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. The 240-volt outlet still sits on the side of my house, near the pool equipment. I installed a combination lock cover after the locksmith removed Melissa's unauthorized box. Not because I think she'll try again. I don't. But because boundaries maintained are boundaries respected. The camera is still mounted under my eave, still recording, still backing up to the cloud. Some habits are worth keeping. Dave came over for beers last weekend. We sat on my patio and talked about nothing in particular. Football, work, the new restaurant that had opened on Main Street. At some points, the conversation drifted to Melissa. You know she put her house on the market, Dave said. I hadn't known. When? Last week. Quiet listing. No sign in the yard. I only found out because my wife's friend is a realtor. Dave took a sip of his beer. Asking price is about $20,000 under market value. She wants out fast. I thought about that for a moment. Melissa Ramirez, who had ruled Sycamore Ridge for a decade, was now trying to escape it. The community she had controlled had become a place she couldn't stand to live in anymore. Not because anyone was harassing her. Not because anyone was seeking revenge. Simply because everyone knew. The neighbors who used to defer to her now looked through her. The authority she had wielded was gone, and without it, she was just a woman who had stolen from her neighbors and been caught. Some people might call that karma. I just call it consequences. You feel bad at all? Dave asked. I mean, you basically ended her whole life here. I considered the question seriously. Did I feel bad? I searched for guilt, for regret, for some sense that I had taken things too far. I found nothing. She ended it herself, I said. I just documented the process. Dave nodded slowly. Fair enough. We finished our beers and watched the sun go down. The sky turned orange, then purple, then deep blue. Stars appeared, faint but visible. The same stars that had been there the night I first discovered the charging cable snaking under my fence. The same sky, the same neighborhood. but everything was different now.
I don't hate Melissa Ramirez. I never did. Hate requires an emotional investment that I wasn't willing to make. What I felt, what I still feel, is something closer to disappointment. Disappointment that someone could live 52 years and never learn that boundaries exist. Disappointment that power, even small power, so often corrupts the people who hold it. Disappointment that she never once considered apologizing, never once admitted she was wrong, never once showed any sign that she understood why what she did was unacceptable.
But disappointment is not my burden to carry. Melissa made her choices. I made mine. The universe sorted out the rest. Boundaries are not walls. That's something I've come to understand more clearly through all of this. Walls are meant to isolate, to separate, to keep everything out. Boundaries are different. Boundaries are signals. They tell the world where you end and someone else begins. They make coexistence possible by making expectations clear. Melissa didn't respect boundaries. She saw them as obstacles to be circumvented, rules that applied to everyone except her. And for 10 years, she got away with it, until she didn't. The night I discovered her theft, I had a choice. I could have ignored it. I could have confronted her in anger. I could have done a dozen things that would have felt satisfying in the moment, but achieved nothing in the long term. Instead, I chose documentation. I chose the process. I chose to fight with evidence instead of emotion. That choice made all the difference. Last night, I slept through until morning. No alerts on my phone, no green light pulsing in the darkness. No one sneaked onto my property while I dreamed. Just silence and peace and the knowledge that what was mine was still mine. My electricity bill this month, $93. My solar panels are working perfectly. My outlet is secure. And for the first time in a year, I don't have to check my camera before I go to bed. That's what justice feels like. Not fireworks. No celebration. Just the quiet certainty that the right thing happened and that you helped make it happen the right way.